a set of discussions, and we have a first question. Please.
Hey, it's been a very, as you said, a very diverse set of statements and conversations. I've got some, like a simple dilemma, which I think this panel might be able to help me out, is that I've heard some interesting things about that commons can be actually come up by creating a common intermediary between institutions to be able to develop these commons. However, what I see from my own practices and from listening to you is that the commons are always been happening for the elites and being able to deal with the elites. Like in the, even the keynote speaker, the kind of the country whole came together about with that common physical space was when it happened to one of those elite members of it. Whereas when the people from the downside who are not elite, who are the common ordinary man, they themselves are actually surviving due to the commons by sharing and creating, and they don't trust the elites that they will penetrate them. So how this dilemma may be able to solve in that to penetrate these commons into the common people? Thank you.
Anybody care to comment? Yeah. You can have that.
Yeah, I can link up to that with one remark, which also maybe is a comment on the diversity of positions and the commonalities of questions. It links also up to things Ben said, because I think your question is related to the question, besides the question of social stratification and who is projecting the commons from where, is the question of resources. Because this kind of surviving mode that you described, and some people refer to it as the undercommons, is actually a whole mode which is very important because it shows us that the currency of the commons is not money. And I think this was one of the important strategical valuable contributions by Transmediale when it decided to be part of the Berlin Commons in a way and found the resource that initially we had a discussion why that name is so important, and it's important because resources are something that are sometimes believed to be out there and to be exploited. At the moment everyone is looking to Africa, for example, to get to the resources. But the more intelligent and kind of more political way to see it is that resources can be very different things, which are just whatever you can take a hold of and share in order to reach anything like surviving or sustaining a certain culture. So I think it's very important to, and this would be like a term that I came up with in this discussion, so it helped me already. It's kind of a pair, maybe a twin sister, whatever, arguing sister maybe with the unintended commons, which is the excessive commons. I think we need to talk about excess again, because I don't want to be in a discussion about the commons where the commons are only defined by how can I fundraise this, how can I sustain that, and how can I make something more economical? Because the commons only come about by things that are outside of these systems of measurement and official evaluation, by excess, even I think in the underclass. It's an act of giving, of contributing something outside of these systems, and that creates the commons. And I would like, in a rich country like Germany, not to talk about where can we fund the next lab from, which is a serious question we also confronted, but there is so much cultural and economical wealth here. So if there's the intention to have something like the commons, go and spend it. There are many good ways to spend it, and let people loiter, think, hang out, drink, fund monasteries, whatever. But don't talk only about the commons as this kind of survival mode, back on the wall, where do I get the next support from? Because that's not what, I mean, I think crisis and commons, as I said, there is an important link there, but I would take a dual position and say, not let's not only talk about the commons as something to survive, barely survive on, like bare living, but let's see it as a potential, as something we want, as something we want to institute, as a capacity building that we want to have, and it's an investment in terms of spend away something. Otherwise, you don't get anything in return that's worthwhile.
I think the maker culture is about that. I'm going to take one example referring to the feminist movement. The maker culture allow women now to build some very simple device, not costful device to prevent aggression, to prevent assault, to prevent rape. There are a lot of funny tools that you can build yourself, connecting you to many other people if someone is assaulting you in the street. So the maker culture is about sharing and building yourself, even if you are in remote place, even if you have no access to technology. It doesn't cost a lot of money to have your own device connected, and it can prevent a lot of damage to women on the streets. I have a lot of funny examples, but you can read it on the site.
I think that's a great question, and it perhaps helps us tie so many different diverse positions together, because of course one of the things that we are talking about is the relationship between crisis and the commons. Like how you generate a crisis is going to define what kind of commons you are going to build. And the question is going to be asking whose crisis are you trying to address, and oftentimes it's the people who are already privileged who seem to be in a state of crisis, and we're trying to help them sustain themselves rather than looking at those whose crisis cannot even be recognized for yourself, right? And I kind of wanted to add to the notion of the crisis, maybe the question of protectionism. There is a certain benevolence about how the commons need to protect certain people. But what happens when you start protecting people is that you start excluding them from the commons. They don't belong there. They need to be kept away, and now we will protect them, right? And so when women protesters come out in the streets of Delhi to protest against rape, they need to be thrown out. They need to be protected. They need to be kept away. And let the other people actually define what the commons are going to be, and then make those commons safe for these women to pass through. So we need to be perhaps more careful about this protectionism that keeps on coming up in the disguise of sustainability, in the disguise of strategies or longevity of certain kinds.
Another question?
Hello, thank you. I think there won't be any ability of change unless this postmodern discourse of academic speech or system is getting broken down or more eased up, because it's it is exclusive, and there's a lack of communication and democracy, and there won't be any progress or innovation of the public common in general just because of this. And I'll take for example, the feminist discourse, because even here in Germany, unconformist commons are getting repressed, and by this democratic system, and yeah, so it's exclusive, and I hope the digital, post-digital system breaks this up, because it's visual and you can have different kinds of communication and stuff, so you might think about this. Hi.
Well, it's a good question. If anything we're discussing can also point towards this kind of emergent commons that Nishant was actually from the beginning talking about. Clemens, we're grasping for the mic, no? Yeah.
No, in a way, just like, I mean, because this side is a little bit representing, I guess, this academic thing you talked about and this exclusion in some way. And of course, it's about terming things and having like terms to understand like transitions, to understand processes and so on and so on. But you're the first here actually to have our ears when it comes about bashing academia in some way.
It's about bashing, it's about opening it up and making it easier, communication for change in the general public.
But yeah, that's what I understood. Just like that, maybe, I mean, universities in some way were always exclusive, of course, and we know the German discourse about that. 60s is interesting, 70s, because they opened up and they have a tradition in some way to be producers of the common as well and the common. So I wouldn't like completely leave them out of the equation when it comes about producing these kind of things, especially if it's about the new settings in some way. I mean, here the transmediale cooperation we had, which was perfect. Also people here who worked for us, who are coming from these more, let's say, radical practices and who actually got a space also at university to experiment about their own practices, but also to discuss these kind of common terms with us to understand this kind of transition processes. So, sorry.
No, if you take different methods, then there would be maybe more or a greater public, what's it called? Public, more people here. Just break it down up to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to add one sentence coming back to the glossary of subsumption, but the monastery would be another example. I'm just saying I wouldn't play this identity game because I totally subscribe to what you're saying. And this is why we're here, and this is why we're doing workshops, and this is why we also try to open up theory as part of what is to be negotiated as being common. So this is why we went to Athens to do a workshop on let's redescribe the city as it is and what are the problems. So I think we need, and I totally support that, we need a new understanding of theory and including experts, which was already mentioned, because I think that's kind of the last resort of an exclusive thing that needs to be also taken by commoning.
Yeah, I mean even non-conformist, syndicate, radical leaflets are written in academic speech, and the general public don't understand them, and they don't identify with this, or just can't generally understand the linguistics.
I know exactly what you're saying. I'd like to respond because I really know what I really hear what you're saying, and I think what happens is that I think we need our academics to do the kind of sometimes the careful technical work of helping us to know what the contemporary vocabularies, how they will allow us to understand the emerging stuff. But I think I agree with you that I don't think there are enough of us taking enough care to make the translation into natural language and to ask the question, are we communicating? Do you understand? What do you need? What do you still need to know before we're actually on a common ground so that we can start to have a conversation across these different disciplines? I think it's a real problem. It's certainly, in England, it's very exclusive on a class basis. So we end up very often that our culture, certainly our arts cultures, end up a preserve of the middle classes and upwards because the working class culture is very alienating. The kind of middle class language through which art is produced and discussed is very alienating for people. And I agree with you. I think it's a real problem because we need to have this diversity of engagement before things start to really kind of resonate for people and we can work together on the things that are important. So I agree.
Yeah, it keeps that class thing alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a next question from the end.
So, since the title of the panel is post-digital, and we're discussing the commons, I kind of feel like we're still. I'm hearing a lot of notions that are not really post-digital. So I'm still hearing a lot of a romantic notion of the commons, of this. This thing that is slightly inspired by networks, by this idea of distribution of power, and when we look at everybody as equal, everything would be fine, as if inequality would be solved by the fact that that we look at everybody as a network. In a way, I feel that some of this romantic notion is using political language to avoid the biggest political question of power. This division of commons as this thing that belongs to everybody. But then, we're talking about, right of access and not resources. I'm talking about physical resources. So my question, and maybe a bit of provocation, especially when we're talking about women, can build funny tools to protect themselves. I don't subscribe to that. I think, this idea that everybody would protect themselves because each one of us has the knowledge rather than the power. I think this. I don't think that this notion of the commons that we've developed through the digital can survive to the post-digital as a proposition to avoid inequality. And I will end my note with a quote from Carter USM. The North and South are divided no more, so you and I can be equally poor. So I think the potential of if there's a political potential for the commons is to bounce back into grouping and power. The question is, would that stop being the commons as soon as we gather and create new power?
I just want to answer about women. Maybe it's because you are not a woman that you never thought about building yourself an object to protect you from assault in the street. I mean, when you see in India that politics are not able to protect women, then you understand that the maker culture is make yourself the tool and don't speak about, protection that will come from nowhere. It will never come. That is the maker culture is about making the tools that you need for yourself, for the community, for for people.
Is the maker culture going to fix inequality by the fact that we're giving the opportunity for someone to protect themselves rather than divide ourselves from this notion of everybody, the DIY notion, and into a collection of power? I think that there's something about this, about looking at networks as a model for society that doesn't work that way.
Well, maybe, society is not working anymore as it was working before. Maybe those independent labs, those hackerspace, those, empowerment is coming from people. When you need something, you're going to find a way to build what you need. You're going to see in Africa, you're going to see in South America, those labs are not made by people that are only coming from elite class, university. I mean, it's a strong movement coming from the people themselves.
Margaret Thatcher would agree that society doesn't work that way anymore.
I won't argue. Maybe I pass the mic.
Sorry, can I just add one small?
Yeah.
All right. I actually want to thank you for the question because my area of specialization is cyber cultures, and I'm supposed to be extremely pro technologies which protect us, which I'm not. And it makes me very uncomfortable when listening to the rhetoric of how DIY cultures will save us. And I don't think anybody is skirting the discussion around power, except that for me, for example, to name something as power makes it a closed conversation because I don't know what to do once it's been named power. So the positive part of it, I think in a lot of the new nomenclature, is to try and break up power into bits and pieces that we can understand and negotiate with. And that's why I'm kind of interested in the commons as contested and looking especially at the unintended contestations rather than the ones which are visible. But I actually share the discomfort that you have with the DIY cultures about let's produce tools by which women will keep them safe, because it very easily bleeds into an argument which says that if the woman was raped, she must have been asking for it. Right? That it is her responsibility now to enter into the commons as a body which can be protected, and it's entirely her own thing. And so I'm extremely resistant to solutions which claim to be feminist solutions, but are actually solutions to just keep on excluding women more and more from the act of loitering. Right? That she has to pass through the commons, so let's just create these tools and applications, including crowdsourcing and crowd mapping and, I don't know, bras which do not unclasp, and chastity belts on their bodies, and so on and so forth. And this extends to women's bodies, it extends to queer bodies, it extends to black bodies, so it's not really a woman's problem, so to speak. So I share your discomfort by making this now the woman's responsibility to protect her. At the same time, I do think that these tools are extremely successful in trying to depathologize the women's own perception of the commons. Right? In terms that they know that these tools might not necessarily protect, but having access to them does give them a sense of empowerment and an ability to kind of reappropriate the commons in certain ways. One of my most favorite stories about a very traditional tool that women in Bombay, and it's in the book I had mentioned again, use in the local trains. Right? So the local trains in Bombay are a nightmare. If you're traveling in rush hours, in a train that is built to house 100 people, there are 500 people traveling in the compartment. So you're completely kind of scrunched up together. And you have women's compartments, but it's not necessarily a safe space either. One of the things that women do is that even unmarried women often wear 2 signs of marriage on their bodies. One is this Mangal Sutra, which is like a locket and a pendant that women in India often wear, Hindu women wear, to show that they are married, and they put like vermilion in their hair. Right? And I know single women, for example, who use those strategies as tools of protection. They might be feminist, they might be anti-marriage, but this allows them to mark their bodies as safe in some ways. So having access to tools is not necessarily a bad thing, but putting the responsibility of protection and safety onto the tools is where the problems actually start beginning. So I just wanted to kind of qualify that a little bit. Yeah? But thank you for the question.
We're going to have to wrap up, actually, but if you have a passionate question, yeah, then.
Very
I also
passionate.
have a question.
There's also, yeah.
I was just curious how you guys felt about, for example, something like the refugee movement in Berlin, which I feel like kind of puts into contestation many of the proposals that you put forward, which sort of presents the big other as the penultimate barrier to even remotely being able to live in common or even approach other bare life, let alone, you know, post-digital or networking or any other kind of intended or non-intended commons. Because it's sort of like when you even think about even in the city in which this whole conversation is taking place, the refugee movement is a very big provocation in that sense, in terms of how and in what way what we recognize as who we live in common with and what life itself is. If the state prohibits you from even being able to approach other human life on the most basic of levels, to what use do we then have a DIY aesthetic? Is it? I'm into it. I'm super into it, and I want to go forward, but it's like that question haunts me.
Oliver?
I think those both positions that are now up in the air, there's a way to link them, and I think another critical part of the question was what does post-digital actually qualify here? What does it change about the romantic discussion about the commons? And I would say, I mean, I know of people at the moment in Berlin and otherwise in Europe who are using these new affordances, these new technologies, and the new kind of lightweight opportunities, which is what the digital brought, to build communication structures to actually do something about this in different ways. Finding ways which are possible, building communication structures to organize these marches. Rather in the future, it hasn't really been done at this point. And the same is true for this question of gender and violence. We had Misha Cardenas, who was also part of Transmediale once. He has this project called, he worked with migrants on the she, I have to say now, that's right. She worked with migrants on the Mexican border, trying to use these technologies to not let them dehydrate in the desert. And she has a project against gender violence, which is kind of a mixture of these both approaches, because it says DIY culture and this kind of technology fixation doesn't solve anything, but you have these technologies and you can build communities now in a different way that can communicate very easily to protect each other. So it's a question of still like a social project that is involved and having real social contexts that are not built on money or policing, but they're built on inherent interests and care for the other. But these technologies help doing that, and that's the post-digital. While the other side of power, I would say, around the post-digital has also been part of the discussion last Transmediale, which is that the post-digital is also dangerous. So I don't know how you intended your question, but I would also say one question is reframing the question of the commons in the light of the post-digital, but then also not put anything like any unambiguous weight or value on the post-digital, because it has attention. And the other side of these opportunities that I just described, and which are described by all the projects here at Transmediale, noticing those are fringe projects, the other side is the relation between the post-digital and post-democracy, which I think is a very real linkage. So all these technologies are, of course, also used to build these kind of enclaves to protect certain people who have the entitlements to be protected at some point, or who are entitled to be protected as long as they don't disturb or loiter or disturb the aesthetic scene. So there's the tension, I think, that we have to be aware of, and that's the tension of power. And there is a way to, I think, to link the new opportunities of these labs, cultures, in a non-ambiguous way, just seeing that there are new opportunities to build these new concepts of how the common can be organized now in this post-digital situation.
Well, I think we take the last question from Marcel, right? Yeah.
It's 10 minutes.
And Adnan, they can't really make up their minds.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I would like to remind about massively available things and resources and accessible by principle. So thanks to Ford, a lot of people could drive a car. And thanks to Microsoft and Intel in the 90s, the whole world got the computers. But we were reminded through free software that doesn't mean that we can celebrate it completely, because Microsoft and Intel didn't really made or transform the possibility of non-rival goods, which we have with the digital, to become really non-rival goods and to become a commons. So in that sense, it took quite some time and efforts to go with the free software, to go with the sharing as in regulation, as a legal regulation, and then also maybe to give up and say that that doesn't work too, so maybe we should just go and abolish the intellectual property, because there is a possibility to do that, and there are quite good arguments. So I agree that we can celebrate that massively available, massively produced tools and all of that, but I'm not sure that we are really going in the right direction in that sense, because it reminds me of Microsoft, Intel and Ford, and I think that the capitalism found the ways how to finance that, and that's called venture capital. And if you think about it as the adventure capital, which tries to find 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 and then to invest some money and make a huge profit. So in that sense, I'm not sure when we celebrate that as in it's great, it's like so many people now have access to use this. I absolutely agree, but I think that there is certain principles which we should go and fight for. Otherwise, it will just that the financial, the innovations in the financial sector will just steal from the possibility of having the commons into just making some kind of a hybrid transition where one few very innovative will get millions, and that's happening a lot also in that 3D printers. So it starts like an open source project, but then they just like steal it and close it, and then do the Kickstarter and what not. But I'm not sure that that's really going in the direction which we are talking about. I'm just thinking that it's a transition where capitalism is trying to do that casino economy for a while and then go back to the regular monopolies which they used to do.
But open software created open art, open science, open architecture, and this is a real...
It didn't. That's a huge, that's not open. Creative Commons in that sense promised that will happen. It didn't happen at all. Music is like as close as it used to be. It's available, massively available, waiting for the adventure capital. But it's not accessible. It didn't transform that into the commons. Because if you want to make anything which is in any way relevant in a market share, then lawyers will get you. If you are in architecture, if you are in art, if you're in culture, if you're in science, we don't have access to scientific articles. People die because of that. So none of these happened. That's what I'm trying to say. And none of that happens because we are easily forget about the principle, because that accessibility goes to the principle, and we shouldn't really see that and kind of make a mistake in seeing the massively available as something which is a big victory. I don't think so.
Well, that was quite strong. I tried to keep it short because I also had most of that what he talked about written down, so I'm quite confused now. But I think I just want to keep it simple somehow in time and space, and as a commons to just kind of reflect on that. And one of those cultural commons spaces, places I came across from an experience-wise kind of engagement are actually squats or kind of occupied spaces, those spaces which are actually taken, some might say steal, and to kind of quote Brecht here, going nicely with your comment here really is kind of who has will be given and who has not will take. So I saw yesterday Mackenzie's swanky images of these flats in New York or wheresoever. Gosh, if you have a crowbar as an artist, you probably have the tool. You just get into those spaces because what you need is a gallery, a space, and an atelier to work with. So my question really kind of goes into the direction, how can we kind of accommodate this taking of Brecht's notion of who has not can take? So really, how can we accommodate the kind of stealing back of the commons? Because I kind of don't know if that kind of comes with your kind of notion of we should maybe try to get out 1,000 crowbars to artists, something like that. I don't know.
I don't think. No.
To say it's pro-emancipation and anti-protection. Don't break it down. Just give the chance for general enlightenment.
I think we shouldn't start to attempt to continue to addressing these questions now, because we are really out of time, and we will continue anyway informally. I think once we leave the stage, or you come up here and talk to us. I'm not sure even if we can't steal back to the commons. That seems contradictory. Why would you have to steal something for the commons? They are outside the structures of stealing, I think. Well, maybe you care to disagree. I would like to just comment on to try to bring the discussion to a close. So, because I started out with talking about movement from innovation as a demand increasingly put on culture, especially, of course, digital or post-digital culture. And it seems as if, ironically, we move back to a kind of state where we need to innovate the concept of the commons. It will probably be the demand put on people like you that were Ruth and Ben and Valentina and Pieterjan and also Reimar as somebody who's working, all of you with projects and institutions that now find themselves in this post-digital reality, in some cases giving out funding, in other cases trying to get it, in other cases disregarding the question of funding, but really we're just working with processes of commoning and getting by and trying to foster some kind of emergent commons in society. But for this to be a sustainable practice, still it will have to be presented and launched in some ways innovative. I think this is like the curse that comes back now that we say you don't have a good enough concept actually of commons and the maker culture. Will it actually be able to solve all of these problems? Probably not, but it's addressing some things in society that, however problematic the maker culture is as an outsourcing in some way of a lot of responsibility society to this DIY ideal that relates perfectly to what Nishant was also speaking about and what the commenters were saying. There is something there, and we are trying to re-articulate it. We are not succeeding to bring it to a close, but I hope that we will continue this dialogue within the concept of post-digital review also in the future and with the different actors in the city and internationally here at the festival. It's always an ongoing, I think, even if we are not always calling it commons, all the projects that we're presenting, this for me is an essential conversation that we have been having about conditions of post-digital work, actually. Yeah. So thank you all for listening, and thank you all.